Okay guys, what I'm going to show you in this video is how to do a wet stretch for a piece of watercolor work. One of our students here had started a painting and they had only masking taped it down to a hardboard, which is a dry stretch, and that's typically enough. But if you're going to end up doing a lot of wet on wet work, your tape will continue to pull up because your paper will react so strong and keep exploding from all that water. So if you're going to do a lot of wet on wet work, you need to do what's called a wet stretch. That means we need to put this in a nice clean water bath and let it soak and expand. So since this artist didn't get too far on their piece, we're just going to give it a bath now, and we're going to wet stretch it. Think of it like a sponge. As this sponge sits in the water, it's absorbing and expanding, right? That's why your paper ends up bubbling up. So now in the water, we're going to let this sit in here for probably about 10 minutes. I'm going to fold it over without putting a crease in it. I want it completely submerged. It's going to expand like our friend the sponge here. And before it can dry and contract, we're going to staple it down onto a piece of plywood. We'll also use this water tape. This is just paper tape with a gum adhesive on one side. So we've cut 2 short sides and 2 longs in preparation for the next step. And then we're going to tack it down with a staple gun onto a piece of plywood. All right guys, we're back, and our paper has now been soaking for just under 10 minutes, but I'm guessing it's expanded to its full size like the sponge here, right? Taking on all that water and grown. Before we stretch it, I just want to reference this piece. This piece is a large piece, but because you can tell most of the work on it was done wet on dry, most of the paper was not exposed to a lot of water at one time, and it actually stayed down on the board. You can get away with doing a big piece like this just by taping it down, a dry stretch, to a piece of hardboard, as long as you don't get it too wet. So this piece, though, we're working on now is going to require a lot more. So we're just going to pick it up, and we're going to let the excess water drain off. And then we want to make sure our hands are clean. We're going to bring this down to the board, center it on our board, and then we're going to use our paper tape, and we're going to attempt to quickly tape and tack this down before it dries. So in its biggest state, we're going to stretch it or tack it in that state, and then it will stretch itself tight as it dries. So typically what we'll do, and we'll just take a little bit of water, our sponge here we'll use to quickly wet this tape. Otherwise you'll be here licking it for hours, and that's pretty gross, and you'll pass out from adhesive intoxication. You're just going to tack this down. It's not a thing. No. I just made that up. You're going to kind of press this flat without hopefully moving any of that paint, and then we're going to go to the opposite side. So in painting, anytime you're stretching anything, even with dry stretch, I kind of say that is do one side, go to the opposite. It doesn't matter what side. Stretching canvas on a frame, we're always going opposites, right? And we're kind of removing any excess bubbles or canvas or whatever that may be. Now we're just going to do that one. You want to get that one? We'll get that wet. Take that from you. How to get this one wet?
Oh, that is sticky.
It is. I remember when I was a kid, in art class, they had a sticky tape project. They used to have colored sticky tape. I don't know if they had that when you were kids, but we would be licking it. And I just remember being sick to my stomach after the class because it was like licking all these colored sticky tapes and making sticky tape art. Yeah, this is a great part of this video. Okay, now we're going to take an industrial stapler, and what I like to do is make sure we had already established a tape line from where the masking tape originally was. I take my fingernail and just bring it along the edge so I know when I sink a staple in, it's actually going to be in the paper, and it'll be centered in that part of the paper. So when I come down with the gun, I center the gun, like the gap here with the gap here, and then I know it will go into the paper. So if I don't do that, if I stretch it, if it's over here, it will pull itself right out of the staple, and then it defeats the purpose. Now, these staples are hard to pull out. So the more you put in, the more you have to take out later. So we're just going to work ourselves around by putting them about 3 inches apart. Now, the only disadvantage to the dry stretch is you're going to have those holes appear in the final piece. But this piece we can cut a mat for that will cover those up. And traditionally that's what should happen. So no worries. And now once this piece dries, you'll be able to get this extremely wet. You'll still have to allow recovery time so your paper doesn't tear, but it will never be bubbly and it won't pull itself off the board again. So that concludes our wet stretch.